chug, 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 chug,
Welcome back to the Wizard Staff. I'm your host, Guy.
And I'm Blake.
And it's that time of year again. Commander 2019. Woo! Woo! That wasn't very enthusiastic. Woo, Blake. Can I get a woo? That was actually a lot better.
That might be too loud, I'm sorry.
Commander 2019, it's that time of year again where new Commander decks, the PreCons, are put out by Wizards of the Coast. Oh, didn't even do our standard intro before hopping into what we're talking about today. We are the Wizard Staff, two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when you're playing children's card games. Alright, now back to Commander 2019.
Already drunk.
So we got 4 new... Yes, pre-gamed a little before the episode. Last year we had a couple... Last year, like every year, for the past, I think, 8 years at this point,
Something like that.
We have new PreCon decks for Commander. Last year, in one of the I think it was our 4th episode, we talked about the new Planeswalker decks that came out from Wizards of the Coast. This year, we have 4 new decks that revolve around different mechanic that is pretty popular among the Magic community. We got Populate, Flashback, Madness, and Morph. Blake, what are your thoughts?
It's pretty cool. I think this is the first time I've seen them do a Commander set revolved around mechanics. So that's neat.
Yes, they've done Planeswalkers before, they've done Tribal, they've done the 4-color commanders, and in the 4 colors they also had the partners. So
This is cool.
It's nice that they pick a different theme each year. We are going to get into talking about Commander 2019 in just a sec. Blake, what are you drinking tonight? We're not drinking the same thing.
Nope. Well, I'm drinking St. Archer Mosaic IPA. I just didn't want to get a 6-pack because that was a lot, so I just got this really large beer.
I'm drinking the Arrogant Bastard Ale once again. When I drank this during our fair episode because I couldn't find the beer that you suggested, and again I couldn't find it. So thanks a lot, Safeway. We are going to be talking about Commander 2019. Once again, 4 themes: Populate, Flashback, Madness, and Morph. We'll talk about what each of those mechanics mean when it comes time to explaining the decks and explaining the new commanders. But I want to go into a little about the Commander 2019 design philosophy, which is a document that was released and we'll include down in our little show notes. The main points that Commander PreCons are meant to hit upon are that they are to introduce Commander to existing Commander players and people who want to get into the game, support existing decks, and inspire new decks. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end and see how well did WotC do with these decks this year and kind of explain overall thoughts on each deck as well. Last year, one of the biggest complaints from the community about last year's decks were that, no good reprints. So this year, why don't we mention some of the reprints that make it not worthwhile, I guess, but some good reprints that were added to this deck.
Well, there were a couple, but the main one that stands out is Seedborn Muse. It was actually recently reprinted in Battlebond, but it's still nice to get another reprint of it. It's nice. I like it.
Yeah, it's one of those cards, Seedborn Muse, 3 green, where it untaps all your creatures during all your opponent's untap steps. It's definitely a very powerful card that can pretty much be slotted into... Oh, untap all creatures in land?
Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step.
Wow, yeah, so that is definitely something that can just be a powerhouse. You can slot it into any green deck, for sure. So nice to see that it was reprinted.
You can, but you probably shouldn't.
Well, okay, maybe. Another one that I wanted to highlight is Stronic Resonator, which is a artifact that taps for 2, and it copies a triggered ability. Because this is the first time that it's been reprinted. It has only had 1 printing so far, and it is now being reprinted so that it can go into the Morph deck. Overall, though, this year has been much better with the reprints. No high-level card, like no $20 or $25 card, but a lot of good like $9 or $10 cards. I was hoping personally that we would have some of those like $20 or $25 cards, maybe 1 in each deck, kind of like to help offset last year. I also personally think that just maybe you could have thrown in the recently reprinted Shocklands, because those are good cards for EDH decks. They aren't too expensive at the moment either. Just one man's thoughts.
I wonder if reprinting cards of that high of price would have like made each deck just a little bit too expensive than WotC wanted to make them. I think that's probably why.
I'm sure that there's a reason, and I'm also maybe they didn't want to reprint the Shocklands because they want to like try and support the Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance that they just reprinted.
Yeah.
Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but at some point I feel like Shocklands are cards that could almost be printed in a lot of the just Commander precons.
Yeah. All right, so should we just dive in here?
Let's just dive in. We got a lot to talk about. All
right.
16 new commanders, 4 decks. Let's go.
Here we go. So we're going to start off with the Populate deck. Populate is, and this one is red, green, white. To populate means to choose a creature token you control and create a token that's a copy of that creature token. So we start off with the commander of this deck, which is Gibboney, Conclave Exile. 2 red, green, white, legendary creature, human shaman, 2/5. When it enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 green rhino token with trample. Whenever this card attacks, populate, the token enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. This seems like general good token beatdown deck. Adding red to populate is really nice. It's supporting that populate mechanic that already exists. A 4/4 trampling token is pretty decent. Not to mention that you could run Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Primal Vigor, Anointed Procession, all those enchantments that double your tokens basically. God, I love enchantments so much. And then you can also run Breath of Fury as like a kind of soft win con for your deck, assuming all of your opponents have creatures with less than 4 toughness. You can just kill all of your opponents right then and there. Also, if you want to play a bit more spiky, you can always do like Kiki Jiki combos or Helm of the Host combos, because those slot right into the 99.
Yeah, Populate used to primarily be a Selesnya mechanic, so green-white. So cool that it's now being added to red, especially since we'll talk about a couple cards that are red and can populate. You want these big creatures to attack, and you want to probably create a lot of copies of them, which is a very red thing to do. Attack combat. Go listen to our mono red pets episode, mono red cards pet episode that we just did. Just need to plug ourselves a little, but
a little bit.
Yeah, I like this. I think this is it could be a very powerful commander, especially if you throw in some of those enchantments that you mentioned, Blake. The deck already does include Second Harvest, and I feel like this is another one of those good green finisher cards. It's only 4 mana, and it creates a copy of all the tokens you have. So if you just, already have a couple big tokens, why don't you just double everything and then swing in for the attack and, yeah, just punch face.
I think this will be a pretty good deck out of the box, and I feel like it's pretty good in space where you can put in good upgrades. So overall, I think this is a really great card. Why don't you talk about the next one?
Atla Palani, Nest Tender. 1 red, green, white, legendary creature, human shaman, 2/3. For 2 generic mana, tap, create a 0/1 green egg creature token with Defender. Whenever an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library and end a random order. Personally, I think that this is another good commander. So it's one of the 3 commanders that fit the color theme that you could run right out of the deck. Personally, I think this is another good one that you could, if you just wanted to use the PreCon that you have. This would be another good one that, just be able to have. You could populate your green egg tokens because you have a lot of populate abilities, and then you're just able to get out a bunch of maybe big creatures.
To me, it seems like cheating out big creatures and then winning with those. It kind of reminds me of Meyer the Anima, which is also in Anya colors. So she taps in order to make the green egg token, which is kind of generally restricted to once per rotation of the table. But obviously there are ways to double it, whether it's like all those enchantments I mentioned earlier. You're copying the trigger with Illusionist Bracers or Rings of Brighthearth. There are ways to get increased value off of that. And then of course you run all the instant speed creature sacrifice effects like Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, Altar of Dementia, all those, so that you don't have to rely on your opponents tacking into you. You can just do it at instant speed. One thing I like about this is that it guarantees the creature. You are going to get a really huge, powerful creature. Unlike Meyer, who you can definitely look at the top certain number of cards in your deck and not have a big creature and then just be sad. So, in that regard, Atla is better.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the upgrades that you would want for this deck are to put in some of those really big, strong creatures. Like maybe you want to throw a Galta in, or some Eldrazi, or
what's another one?
Our big boy, Blightsteel Colossus.
Oh!
Brr, 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 brr.
God, every episode we find a way.
Can't go an episode without him.
Mascot of the
All right.
podcast.
Next card.
All right, that is Marisi, Breaker of the Coil. 1 red, green, white, legendary creature, cat, warrior, 5/4. Your opponents can't cast spells during combat. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, goad each creature that player controls. So, it's alright in my book. I do think goad is a very interesting mechanic, but I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, but this one just doesn't quite do it for me.
To explain gold, so until your next turn, those creatures attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. So I do like how gold makes a reappearance here, but it's not one of the... I don't think that this is a commander that you should run for this deck right out of the box, but I feel like you could build a gold deck with this as your commander.
That's where I see it, and it's cool, but I'm not sure there's a big enough demand for that being made.
No,
I don't expect to see this deck when I go to the LGS every week.
No, but I think there are some people out there who will definitely find this to be at least fun.
Oh yeah, there's always somebody out there that finds something fun.
All right, next we got the commander, the new legendary creature that can't be your commander for this deck because it has 1 less color. Tongraf, First Mate. 2 red, green, legendary creature, Minotaur, Warrior, 5/5. Tongraf First Mate can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. Whenever an opponent attacks with 1 or more creatures, if Tongraf is tapped, you may have the opponent gain control of Tongraf until end of combat. If you do, choose a player or planeswalker that opponent is attacking. Tongraf is attacking that player or planeswalker. So personally, I see this as a very interesting politics card, because if you are trying to kill one person in specific, you could, have your opponent hit you with a very small creature, give them Tongraf to then go at another one of your opponents, and then try and kill them based on commander damage. You'd also probably want to give Tongraf a bunch of artifacts or pumps to make him stronger, and then just be able... So it's almost like a 2-person Voltron deck that you would want to build.
Yeah, if you're running equipment, you'd have to equip all that stuff to him before you lost control of him. So I don't know if you want to run like auras, because then it's easier to buff him after you've already lost him. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this too much, just because, I don't know. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and I don't think it really strikes a chord with me like the previous commander we just talked about does either. Sorry.
Well, it still may not be like the most impactful new commander, but I think that WotC's doing a good job creating cards or commanders that will be able to give interesting gameplay, such as Tongraf or Marisi.
I'm excited about this next card, though. It is Song of the World Soul for white enchantment.
So we're going to go from commanders in the deck, but now we're going to talk about some of the new cards that go with this deck, and then once we're done with that, we're going to go on to the next deck and talk about the commanders there. So
yes,
sorry.
Yeah,
just wanted to clarify that this isn't another new commander. This is a new card for the populate deck.
Oh god, that would have been interesting. Yeah, we're going like basically deck, including deck by deck, commander plus some interesting cards. So, interesting card in the 99 for this deck is Song of the World Soul for white enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, populate. Like, oh, I'm so happy about this. So like just late game, like when you're casting multiple spells a turn, like you can just relatively easily make an army, especially if you have all those token doublers, which I mentioned earlier. I love this. I love enchantments so much.
Yeah, Blake has a hard on for enchantments for sure.
I do. I'm not ashamed of it. Don't kink shame me.
This can definitely be a game finisher for sure. I definitely think that you could even play this like mid game and then kind of just, play your spells and help accelerate to like get to the point where, you have all these big token creatures and you're able to go in for the win.
Yeah. Love it.
All right. The next card, and actually the only other card that we're going to talk about for the populate deck is Gibboney's Belligerence. So this is one of the cards that goes directly with the commander. It is XRR sorcery. Gibboney's Belligerence deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Whenever a creature dealt damage this way dies this turn, populate. So, in my opinion, it doesn't solve big creature problems that your opponents might have, unless you have access to a lot of mana. White's probably not going to give you that. Green might, if you have a lot of mana dorks. So it's not going to help you maybe get rid of an Eldrazi, but it can help with some of the smaller creatures, especially if your opponent is running small tokens, if you're going up against another populate deck. Mm-hmm. And you could even cast it to kill one of your creatures, and then you can then populate one of your bigger tokens. Good idea. Mm-hmm. And then here's a great synergy, but stars would have to align for this in the super best case scenario. But you have Atla also out, and you have some of your egg tokens. Maybe you kill some of your egg tokens with this. Not only can you then populate some of the bigger tokens that you have on the field, but then you can also cheat out some of your creatures in your deck because you're killing the egg tokens, and then you're creating, I don't know, or you're not creating, but you're cheating out big creatures.
True, those are some big brain plays right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. In EDH in general, though, it's I don't know. In more competitive metas, you typically find a bunch of value, low power, low toughness creatures, so that'd be good, but I don't really think competitive metas are looking to play this card, and like you said, this doesn't really deal with big creature problems, which as you get more casual in EDH, typically is what happens, so I don't really feel like there's a place for this card in casual or competitive, and so I'm just kind of meh on this card.
I definitely think that's a fair thing to say, but we'll be talking about this kind of throughout the episode, but since Gibboney's Belligerence is a new card, there are these cards that were designed specifically for this deck the new cards were designed specifically for the deck, and I feel like this is one of those cards that can be pretty good in the right circumstance, and that's just because it's in this deck.
Yes.
Other decks probably don't want to run this, but in this deck specifically, I think this is a good card.
Yeah.
If you want to take this into a more competitive sense, probably not.
No. All right. We're gonna move on to the next deck now. Woo!
Well, I want to just kind of give
never mind.
Overall
Take it
thought. Overall, though, Blake, if you want to chime in with your thoughts, but my thoughts for the deck overall, after looking at the deck list, is that the win con is pretty evident that you just want to create a bunch of big tokens and populate to then kill your opponents with. So I do like how this has a pretty narrow linear strategy. I think that this deck probably does it wants to win by combat is what I'm trying to say. It's using the populate mechanic to win in this way, and I think it does a good job. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think all 4 of the legendary creatures in this deck that are new all synergize to what the main commander wants to do to a point. You make big creature tokens and you have a bunch of goat effects and you kill people and you're gonna have the biggest stuff, so they're always gonna lose in the exchange of combat, and that's how you're gonna win. Yeah, as a product right out of the box, I think it's good.
This one gets a thumbs up from us. All right. Madness. That's you, Blake.
Okay, I guess I'm talking about it. Madness. It is black and red. It's a keyword that represents 2 abilities. The first is a static ability that functions while the card with Madness is in a player's hand. The second is a triggered ability that functions when the first ability is applied. So, Madness, the cost, means if a player would discard a card, that player discards it, then exiles it instead of putting it into their graveyard. And when this card is exiled this way, its owner may cast it without paying the cost rather than paying its mana cost. If that player doesn't, they put this card into their graveyard. Yeah, it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Whatever.
Well, no, you're not without paying the cost. You're paying it at a reduced cost, which is the Madness cost. So if it's the card that you happen to be discarding, you can often play it for a much cheaper cost, but you have to be discarding it specifically.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So we the commander of this deck is Anya, Falconwrath. I think it's Anya, but there's another legendary creature called Anya. I don't know. That's what everyone else has been saying it, so we're gonna call it Anya. It is 1 black-red legendary creature vampire with haste. It says tap, discard a card, draw a card. So it's basically rummage. And when you discard a card with Madness, untap this card. It's a 1/3. The way I see this is that there are 2 ways to build it. Either Madness Tribal or Doomsday. So if you build it the Madness Tribal way, there are 40-ish Madness cards. Most of them are bad, but you basically use it to repeatedly tap and untap Anya to kind of just filter through your deck to the good cards. But I'm not really a fan of that because eventually you're going to hit a land and then you're going to get stuck in the water. You're going to have a handful of land, sorry. And it's just going to be weak as hell. So I don't really like that. Or you could build it the Doomsday way, which involves Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead or Necromancy plus World Gorger Dragon. For infinite mana and taps using Anya to draw your entire library. So what you do is you cast Doomsday, tap Anya, rummage into Fateless Looting, cast Fateless Looting, drawing World Gorger Dragon and Animate Dead. Then you discard World Gorger Dragon and another card, cast Animate Dead for World Gorger Dragon, and then loop that for infinite mana and tapping. Rummage into your last 2 cards in the library that are a creature to end the loop and Comet Storm. And then you use infinite burn on your opponents to win the game.
Well, that escalated pretty quickly.
Yeah, literally there's 2 extremes. It's either complete trash or it's pretty actually strong actually.
I do think that this is a very strong commander. one, especially the fact that it has haste, and so you can just start tapping, discarding your cards, madness, and then being able to draw cards. You've got a good engine. Like earliest you could probably get this like turn 1 if you tried really hard, but yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
All right.
It's kind of funny because it's like very rarely do I see a commander with this extreme of deck building where it's pretty binary. It's like either the really extreme, like pretty trash, or it's pretty extreme and good.
Yeah, and you don't even have to use the madness cost to untap Anya, which just means that you can discard a lot of like madness cards to like just start drawing through your deck until you have the cards that you need, like to then, okay, I'm just gonna like search through my deck. Oh, I got Dark Ritual and Doomsday. Here we go. And then, I mean, you could also probably look for like Mox Opal or like some other CMC artifacts. Just get them out, like 0 CMC artifacts. And pretty much like turn 1, you can get this kind of going.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that good, but it's pretty good. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I like it.
Next is Chainer, Nightmare Adept. 2 black-red legendary creature, human minion. 3/2. Discard a card. You may cast a creature card from your graveyard this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until end of turn. Personally, I don't have much I want to say about this deck. I looked at it and I was like, alright, cool, Chainer's back, but this doesn't excite me that much.
Yeah, it's like less powerful than the mono black Chainer. Like, if the activated ability wasn't restricted to like once per turn, I know you can like do it on your opponent's turn, but even still, I like doing stuff on my own turn and like kind of winning on my own turn. I don't want to have to like do it once on my turn. Okay, do it once on your turn and then once on your turn. That's still a bit slow for me in most situations. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm like you guys. I don't really have too much to say about this. Sorry. Nope.
Alright, then we'll just move on to the next commander.
Yep, we're going to move on to Greven, Predator Captain. It is 3 black-red, legendary creature, human warrior, 5/5 with menace. Whenever it basically gets plus X plus O, where X is the amount of life you've lost this turn, and then it makes more sense when you read the next line of text, which says, when it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw cards equal to that creature's power, and you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. So, like, maybe you kill people with commander damage, because you can sacrifice, like, some Rakdos creature with big power and draw a bunch of cards and lose a bunch of life and pump up this commander and then swing in. I don't know. That's kind of what it seems to me.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have kind of mentioned that this is like a consistent hatred, but then you also get the card draw. Hatred being the one instant that, you know, you pay life to like give your creature plus X. This is saying to me kind of like with the Marisi, where it's not the... I feel like you would need to build a better deck around this card that's not the PreCon. Like, this is something that you could take out maybe some of your first edits to this deck to then put into its own deck and like make it more dedicated if this is the route that you would want to go.
Yeah, you'd have to make this its own commander and completely rebuild the deck from the ground up. You couldn't swap it with the existing cards in the deck. Yeah. No.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
The
next one.
Oh,
Ooh, this is the good one. This is...
This
all right.
is the spice.
Crick, son of Yawgmoth. 4. Black Phyrexian, Black Phyrexian, Black Phyrexian. And if you don't know what that means, Phyrexian means it is a mana cost that you could either pay... So if it's Black Phyrexian, for example, you can either pay 1 black mana, or you could pay 2 life. So very strong because this could essentially come out turn 1 with a bunch of like artifacts and then just paying 6 life to bypass the black mana.
Yeah.
But continuing, so Kirk, Son of Yawgmoth, 4 Phyrexian.
Kirk or Crick?
Crick, sorry. Crick,
Yeah.
Son of Yawgmoth.
Kirk, this is the Starship
generic-
Enterprise.
Alright, one more time. Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, 4 Black Phyrexian, Black Phyrexian, Black Phyrexian. Legendary creature, horror minion, 2/2. For black, lifelink, so he has lifelink, and for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So it turns all of your black mana symbols into Phyrexian mana. And whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Crick, Son of Yawgmoth.
Seems good, I guess.
Holy shit, yeah. Well, we didn't mention. So Phyrexian mana is one of the more broken things that Magic has done, just like ever. It's an 8 on the Storm scale, which means that it has very little chance of ever returning into a standard legal set. And this is the perfect opportunity to bring it back because Commander is not a standard legal set, but it is a very strong mechanic that can still be used. And I feel like this is like the perfect opportunity for a mono black commander. It's a total black thing for you to be able to use your resources to their greatest potential and just to get ahead. That's the idea of black, is the strong will survive and the weak will die. So I couldn't see any other color being able to do this. And just, I don't know, being able to like gain life back to then just use it to like bypass a lot of the mana costs that you have. Fucking whoa.
Yeah, the fact that like it's like, all right, yeah, you'll kill yourself really quickly, but then he has lifelink and pumps himself by +1/+1 counters. So it's like you can kind of offset that a little bit if you attack, each turn. Really makes the downside not so bad. And so it kind of, people are still kind of figuring this card out, but it seems like you can either do like Aetherflux Reservoir Storm, where like you cast a bunch of low CMC spells and you net a positive life versus like losing that life using the Phyrexian mana, and you shoot all of your opponents down. Or you could do Doomsday, where like the top card is Infernal Contract, then Sacrifice, then Walking Ballista, Machaos Thin Hollowed, and Viscera Seer. So like you cast Doomsday, cast Infernal Contract, and draw those 4 cards. It doesn't matter that you're going to like almost 0 life because you're going to win. And you basically do Walking Ballista, Machaos Thin Hollowed combo where like you just shoot everyone with Walking Ballista.
Bang, bang.
That works. Bang, bang, bang. So like you kind of compare this to like the mono black Sidisi deck that uses Ad Nauseam. I know a little bit about like CEDH, but I'm not like 100% knowledgeable in that meta. So like I don't know if Crick is going to become stronger than Sidisi. Again, people are still kind of brewing and figuring it out. But it's like a top contender. Definitely stronger than his dad, Yawgmoth himself, that just came out. So that's pretty amazing. Like we've gotten a lot of mono black strong cards for legendary creatures lately. It's pretty nice. Also, a lot of people have talked about making it a Shadowborn Apostle deck. And all I have to say about that is like, yeah, you can do that, but like Athros is just strictly better because he brings those Shadowborn Apostles back to your hand, and then there are ways in that deck to just play those Shadowborn Apostles again and bounce to your hand, play them again for free, and just like get out all your demons and win. So like Athros is just strictly better, I think, than trying to do the Shadowborn Apostle engine in Crick. Yeah. So also, the last thing I have to say about this is that this can be great in the 99. This does not have to be your commander. One example is this is great in Chainer Dimension Master, the mono black Chainer. Like you can Buried Alive your Grey Merchant, Abhorrent Overlord, and your Razaketh or Runescarred Demon. Then what you do is you cast Chainer, return a demon to the field with 3 life and 3 and a black. If you have something to sack for the tutor, basically at the end you're going to search for Phyrexian Altar, cast the altar, return Abhorrent with Chainer, summoning 7 Harpies, sack 3 of those for 3 and a black to recur Grey Merchant, gaining approximately 27 life, and then you loop Grey Merchant over and over, netting life and draining all of your opponents for the win. And then with Crick, you can basically do this even easier. All you need is 9 mana and 12 life. And that's just one specific example, but this could go in a lot of like black decks, or not even necessarily mono black decks, that can do these loops. It just can potentially make them even easier. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm just a little too drunk to like fully understand, but like I will definitely, as I edit this episode, I will probably see what you're saying, because yeah, this is definitely one of the most talked about cards, just because
Definitely.
wow, like super strong. Personally, I think I would even want to like turn my Infect deck into Crick being the commander, and then maybe making Skithrix its own Voltron level deck. But that's a different talk. We're gonna let's move on to the next card.
All right, the next card in this deck is Aeon Engine. It is 5 colorless. It's an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to exile it, and then reverse the game's turn order. This is kind of interesting. It's just not a card that's ever been done before. It's like, I feel like you would actually have more to talk about this than me, because like from a card design standpoint, this is just weird and neat.
Yeah, I definitely think it reminds me of a lot of the earlier Magic cards like Shahrazad and Falling Stars that had these really funky effects, where this is definitely like now playing into the multiplayer aspect of Commander, and I'm glad that WotC is now kind of exploring that, because I feel like, if anything, that's what's kind of been lacking from some of these Commander products. I think and it's not one of those funky cards that I think the rules committee would eventually ban, because it's definitely something that, you know, depending on who you're sitting next to, now it becomes really important, and it can definitely be like a political thing, especially if you're sitting next to the opponent who is about to win next turn. Use this. Now we have an extra 2 or 3 turns to try and take down the one player who's going to win next turn.
Yeah, I just kind of... It's probably a good thing that it exiles itself, because I was thinking, oh, like, if it didn't exile itself, you could just, like, have Unwinding Clock, and then you could just, like, bounce it between the opponent on, like, around the rotation, like, left and right of you, basically. And if you're in a 4-player pod, just deny, like, the person diagonal to you their turn forever.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, if you know that that's something that you want to do, and you want to like try and like lock out one of your opponents from playing.
Well, you can't do that because it exiles itself.
Well, you can create tokens of artifacts.
Oh, that's so much. That's so much work.
Yeah, and I think that would need to be its own deck in itself, where it's a deck that would check.
That's just a meme. Like, that's just a meme at that point.
Right. It's a deck that could check like the strongest person in your group. Could be interesting.
It's probably, if someone has a super strong deck, this is probably too slow to assemble that meme where you just deny them the turn, and you'd have to like sit down at the table. That's too theoretical. We should move on.
All right. And well, also last thing is just like maybe you play a game and then you realize, oh, hey, this one person is actually super strong. And then you say like, hey, switch places with me. and then you go sit next to someone else, and because you know that you are going to have this card. Anyway, next card, Anya's Ravager, 2 red, creature, vampire berserker, 3/3. Anya's Ravager attacks each combat if able. Anya's Ravager. Oh, whenever Anya's Ravager attacks, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. And it has 1 and an R for its madness cost. Blake, if you could use one word to describe this, what would you say?
Bad.
And so this is another example where I want to say, like, this card was specifically made for this deck. It was specifically made for the madness deck. So I think it's okay.
Even in this deck, it's like you never want to have less than. You never want to have like no hand size. Like, this is just bad. Even in
I don't
that
know, but
situation,
it enables more the madness. Where if you're discarding your hand, maybe you have a couple madness cards in there, and then you're just drawing more cards. I don't know. I feel like this is one of those things where you would want to attack first, to discard your hand, then you do your like second main phase kind of like post shenanigans, and you use the madness ability. I think it's okay in this deck specifically.
You'd have to be mad to play this card. That's all I'll say.
Talk about the next card. Shut up.
All right, we got Bone Miser. It is 4 and a black creature, zombie wizard, 4/4. Whenever you discard a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever you discard a land card, add black. Whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So this is basically Waste Not, but it only affects you. And it's more mana. I'm not. Because it's only you, it's like, it's not as good. Because like with Waste Not, you just have cards that say everyone discard their hand, and you get a bunch of mana, a bunch of tokens, a bunch of card draw. But this, it's only you. And like, yeah, you could use your own logic against me, where it's like, okay, yeah, I'll design my deck where I just discard like creatures, lands, and non-creature, non-land cards all the time. But even then, I'm not sure the benefit you're getting from this 5 CMC creature is worth it. And,
You just made me open up my other beer, Blake, because it seems like we're just going to be arguing a lot.
Good.
Personally, I think that this card is... Yeah. Well, personally, I think that this card is also fine in this deck, specifically because you are discarding cards with Anya's ability, and you get to control what you want. And like, if you need blockers, okay, let me just discard some creatures. And it's not like then casting the madness cost is going to like cancel out the fact that you discarded a card. So I don't know, it still feels like it's a good card for this deck specifically.
I guess. Like, we can keep talking this way, but like you're in the mind frame of, for this PreCon deck, this card is fine, and I'm thinking more broadly of EDH in general. We can keep talking that way. That's fine.
I think that's really important that you are giving the larger picture, but I am giving it from the perspective of the product right out of the box. And for the product right out of the box, I think this is a good card. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yes, but I would also agree with you with like in the worldwide perspective of EDH, you probably don't want this card. I will agree with you there.
Sounds good. We both agree. All right.
Great.
We should talk about the next one.
Meyer in Misery. 1 and a black sorcery. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or enchantment. Seems like a, like, oh, why are you bringing this up? Well, this was, Mark Rosewater, someone else. So Mark Rosewater is probably the second tier mascot to our podcast because we mention him almost every episode too.
We're getting
but
there.
this was his preview card. but it's the first mono black enchantment removal. And he was talking about how they made this card and they intend for black to have more enchantment removal. And it's going to just start coming in slowly.
Yeah, because like we were talking a little bit before this, and you were saying how like red can deal with artifacts but not enchantments, and then mono black can deal with almost WotC wants to make red good at dealing with enchantments or artifacts but not enchantments, and mono black good like able to deal with enchantments but not artifacts. And so they're trying to like build black up to dealing with enchantments the same way red is able to deal with artifacts, right?
Well, mono black can almost deal with everything but artifacts at this point.
Yeah.
It's the one color that can also directly deal with planeswalkers. Though I guess mono red can kind of do that too, with dealing damage to a player. So it kind of helps separate what black and red can do in terms of destruction.
This definitely like deals with enchantments within the mono black way. This card works really well. I like it.
Yeah, and it's nice too that there are a couple cards that we're going to mention, but this one, Meyer and Misery, is a black card that is in the Madness deck, and it is a new card, but it's not specifically new to the Madness deck because they also included it in the Morph deck. So there are a couple cards like that where even though we're mentioning it here in the Madness deck, it'll show up in your Morph deck if that's the deck you end up wanting to get. So yes. I do like how they're including some of the new cards in multiple decks.
Yes.
So okay.
Overall, what do you think?
So yeah, in my opinion, I think this deck has a very strong engine, and I think it could be very powerful, but I think it needs some of those additional cards that we've mentioned for it to have that clear win con. It's an early drop commander with haste, can just start drawing you cards, get through your deck pretty quickly. I'd be interested to see if people just run Madness cards just to get the plus from Anya. You know, there are only maybe 40 to 45 Madness cards, but just which one of those are the most optimal that'll go in this deck. It's kind of like how in my 2B Gitrog deck, I am just putting dredge cards in there for the fact that they can like help me like get the card draw. Are you just going to be running Madness cards in this deck to like kind of help get that card draw?
In the weaker versions of Anya, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to deck number 3.
All right, so we have Flashback. Flashback this time is red, black, white, Jeskai. So
red,
Flashback
white, and blue, baby.
Yeah.
USA.
America.
USA.
Flashback appears in some instants and sorceries. It represents 2 static abilities, one that functions while the card is in a player's graveyard, and another that functions while the card is on the stack. So Flashback, the cost means you cast this card from your graveyard by paying the cost rather than paying its mana cost. And if the Flashback cost was paid, exile this card instead of putting it anywhere else anytime it would leave the stack. So basically it goes to your grave, and then you can play its Flashback cost, use it again, but it's exiled this time, so you can't use it again for future times. Alright, so the commander of this deck is Savina, the Chronoplasm. I believe I said that right. It is 2 blue, red, white. Legendary creature, human wizard, 2/2. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to it. Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery from your graveyard each turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This basically seems like a weaker Cast Dissident Mage. Instead of being in Grixis, it's in Jeskai, and it's a little bit weaker, and that's all I kind of have to say about this card.
Yeah, of the abilities, when we learned what the abilities were for the decks, I was hoping this would be the deck that I want to play most, but it's actually probably the deck I'm least excited about, just because I didn't think that there were many cards that I could take out from this deck that I would want to use. But that's getting into more of the deck perspective than Savine himself. I do think that it's very interesting that Savine prevents all damage that would be dealt to him. So the best ways to get rid of him are board wipes, exile, or -1/-1. This would stop a big ass trample creature, since you would be preventing all damage and then nothing would like trample over him.
Oh, is that how that works?
I believe so. I believe if you are, what happens with trample is it's different from like indestructible, where even if like you're not preventing the damage that's indestructible with indestructibility, you're preventing the damage with Savine's ability, which wouldn't really allow you to trample over the amount of damage, I guess. I don't think that there are many cards like Savine in this manner, so would have to look it up to be more specific, but that's my first impression of like how I think this would work.
Maybe I didn't look it up. We'll go with yours.
All right. Don't take us like verbatim.
Don't take us too seriously. You never should.
Yeah. All right. All right. So next, Jeskai Commander, Elsha of the Infinite, 2 URW. So blue, red, white. Legendary creature, Dijun Monk, 3/3, has prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast the top card of your library if it's a non-creature, non-land card, and you may cast it as though it had flash, so giving your deck instant speed. Blake, what do you have to say?
You basically build this Jeskai Storm. It's basically a Magus of the Future, or a future sight in the command zone, basically. In my mind, this is actually just like a weaker Kaikar Wind's Fury deck, because both these Jeskai decks want to play the top card of the library, and Kaikar is cheaper and has Divergent Transformation, which just wins you the game if Kaikar is in play on the spot. Whereas that's not really a line of play that's available for Elsha, and so Elsha is just slower. I would like to take this opportunity to say that I was wrong back in Corset 2020 review. I thought Villas was the strongest commander over Kaikar. Like Guy said, I was wrong. So yeah, I take it back.
I mean, we all know that I'm the smarter MTG player.
Shut the
it's not
fuck
like
up.
It's not like you needed to admit it, but I appreciate the confirmation. I do think that this card, yeah, it is similar to how one would probably build Kaikar, and it could probably go in the Kaikar deck, unless if you want to make the Kaikar deck super competitive. Maybe not, but I don't know. The Command Zone talked about how this is the card that they would want to run out of the pre-con.
Yeah, they got to test with it a couple times.
I don't know if... I mean, they've gotten to play it. We haven't. But it just seems to me like if the idea of this deck is to, like, flashback stuff, then why wouldn't I want the flashback commander? I don't know. So...
you'll still get the prowess triggers off the flashback, right? If you flashback it from the graveyard.
I guess, but I don't know.
I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't actually care.
Okay. I mean, just the fact that Savine works so well with flashback just makes me think, like, why wouldn't I want the flashback commander? Maybe Elsha could be better in its own deck, but I don't see this as the commander that I would want to run right out of the box. This next one, definitely not, though.
Yeah.
It's your turn.
So yeah. Sorry. It's fuck. I didn't practice this name. Pramicon Sky Rampart. It is blue, red, white, legendary creature, wall, 1/5 flying defender. As it enters the battlefield, choose left or right. Each player may attack only the nearest opponent in the chosen direction and planeswalkers controlled by that opponent. So it's basically like a neat Pillow Fort deck, I guess. It's Mystic Barrier on a stick, and you could play lots of goat effects that make creatures attack each turn if able. That sort of stuff, and just kind of watch the world burn, I guess.
I personally like how it is very similar to like the Aeon engine that we were talking about earlier, where it interacts with, the order of who attacks who. But
yes,
this is also similar to Elsha. I wouldn't think to run this right out as the commander of this deck. You would want to build a more specific deck for this card.
Yes. Also, I just want to say really quickly that the art reminds me of the movie Annihilation, where it's like the wall of like streaming cosmic lights, and it's really enticing and pretty. So yeah, just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I actually didn't think of that till you mentioned it, but that is a good point. The movie was okay, but next we have Gerard, Weatherlight Hero. He's a Boros commander, 2 red and a white, legendary creature, human soldier, 3/3. He has first strike, and when Gerard, Weatherlight Hero dies, exile it and return it to the battlefield. Return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. I think this is a pretty interesting card because it definitely helps with the board wipes. It doesn't help with mass land destruction, unfortunately. Still pretty good. Or better than other Gerard cards.
Yeah, it's like we finally have a good Gerard card, finally. The wording on this leads to some really weird rulings. It's kind of hard to understand. I'm not going to pretend to fully understand it, but I get the gist of it. Basically, it looks like you play an eggs deck that eggs are kind of like cards like Chromatic Star, where they are pretty cheap artifacts that can tap to draw a card. You just play a bunch of those and I don't know, just get good value, I guess. If you make it that way, it's just a weaker Tashara deck. So I don't know if you really want to do that. It basically gives Boros another option, because you can make it not that, where it's just kind of a little bit more combo-y. You can do some combos with Loyal Retainers and Goblin Bombardment and a few other cards. So I think this is kind of quirky enough to be popular. We'll kind of have to see what actually ends up happening, but I think I feel like I might actually see a couple of these in LGS or something.
I feel like you probably would too, just because Gerard's part of the Weatherlight crew and people really like that. And I think now we have a remake of the original Weatherlight crew within the last 2 years. Every original member has been remade to some capacity. This Commander 2019 was definitely a big push for that, but...
So, the next card is Savina's Reclamation. 2 and a white, sorcery. Return target permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from your graveyard, you may copy this spell and choose new targets for the copy. It also has Flashback, 4 and a white. This is pretty decent. That's all I'll really say. It's decent.
This is a card, again, I think that this was made specifically for the Flashback deck, because you could potentially get up to 4 things.
It has the commander in the art. Yes.
Right. That's a very good reason why this was made for this deck. It has the commander in its art. Its ability allows it to synergize very well with Savina, where you're able to get maybe 4 permanents. So, very strong. Very good for also after a board wipe, especially. Next card is Dockside, Extortionist. 1 in R, creature, goblin, pirate, 1/2. When Dockside Extortionist enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. So you can tap treasure tokens, sacrifice them, and add 1 mana of any color. This just gets better and better with the more players you are playing against, and later in the game, since everyone is going to have artifacts to ramp or some kind of enchantment, and this is pretty much a like instant. So like how Smothering Tithe accumulates a bunch of tokens over time, this is a one-time get a bunch of tokens at once to then use that mana almost instantly. I think that this is going to be I don't want to say this lightly, but this could be a mono red staple.
Yeah, like I would almost kind of agree with that line of thinking, because like even if you've only played like 2 or 3 games of Commander, you'll quickly realize, wow, there are a lot of artifacts and enchantments on the board. So in my eyes, if there are more than 2 artifacts or enchantments in play, this is basically a ritual effect that kind of scales with the length of the game. The longer the game goes on, generally speaking, this is going to be a bigger and bigger ritual effect. This is pretty strong, like especially if you time this just before all those artifacts and enchantments are destroyed. Like you could just get like, I don't know, you could easily get like 12 treasures or more with this, and like you only get to use that.
I mean,
and like even though you can't use it like every single turn or accumulate more, still like I think even though you can only use this like basically one time unless you blink it or flicker it, I think it's still really, really good, man.
I mean, in the decks where you might want, if you're building like a Boros or a Izzet build, like you definitely have then those options to like flicker, blink it, and be able to like get him going a couple times, and you just accumulate a bunch of mana. So I'm glad that WotC recognizes that this is one of those cards. It's very red in its like sense, but it's still a very strong card that could just go into like pretty much any deck that wants to run red.
Yep, I like it a lot. Okay, the next card we have is Mandate Peace. 1 and a white, instant. Cast a spell only during combat. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. End the combat phase. So, this is a card I think a lot of people are gonna, well, overlook. I mean, I did. Guy, you had to point it out to me.
Yes, I did. And so it was specifically designed as I was reading the design philosophy, this card was specifically designed to deal with some of those problematic cards that casuals like to bitch about a lot, like Cyclonic Rift or Teferi's Protection, where you play this card kind of at the end, and then you pretty much stop combat. You can like pretty much counter like a Cyclonic Rift or a Teferi's Protection, and you can just come out of it like unharmed.
Yeah, like it's basically like kind of a weaker silence, and it's fine that it's weaker, but it's just another silence effect, which is pretty strong. I don't know, like, yeah, you can only cast this during combat, which I don't like as much, but still, your opponents can't cast spells the rest of this turn, and it doesn't even have to it doesn't even have to be your turn. It could be like another person's turn. Yeah, so they can't bounce all your creatures.
I would be interested to learn the statistic of like how often Cyclonic Rift is played during the combat step specifically, or if it's played
so would I.
For combat. Like, because if that's the case, then like maybe you're holding Cyclonic Rift to like see how combat's going to play out, and then you use it, or is it just on my turn, Cyclonic Rift everyone, now I'm going to swing in and kill you?
Yeah, because a lot of the contention with Cyclonic Rift is like, oh, well, they cast Cyclonic Rift the end step before their turn, so it just guarantees their win, which I'm like I'm fine with the card in general, but like I'm especially fine with it being played that way because it just guarantees like the game is going to end that turn.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so it's like in that situation where it's being cast on the end step before their turn, this card can't even be cast because it's not during combat. So that's a little bit sad. I wish it was like not limited to combat. I wish it was just like another silence effect where it could be cast anytime during a turn. But you know, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, I'm sure that there was a reason why that they said cast this spell only during combat. Maybe it was because they wanted it to be such a cheap cost. Maybe.
Yeah. And this also kind of ties into our next card, which I'm going to read right now. It's Leadership Vacuum. It is 2 and a blue for an instant that says target player returns each commander they control on the battlefield to the command zone. Draw a card. So these in that article were mentioned at pretty much the same time, where it's like Mandate Peace and Leadership Vacuum were designed to combat problematic effects or cards. Leadership Vacuum was made because people complain about hexproof commanders, and how they're really difficult to get rid of. Like, well, just target the player and inadvertently bounce the commander. This bounces not only the commander, but any like commanders they could have stolen or made copies of, like with Spark Double or with Home of the Host. So this is just like pretty decent. And then on top of that, you're drawing a card, so it's replacing itself. So this is actually pretty good because kind of what I think about is like I play an EDH deck that's Sigarda, Host of Herons. And so what you do is she already has flying, hexproof, and can't be forced to sacrifice my permanents. And then what you do is you make her indestructible. And so then once you do that, your opponents just kind of like lean over the table, and then they're like, how the hell am I supposed to get rid of this? And I just kind of like lean back in my chair and I'm like, very few ways. This is why you run Cyclonic Rift.
Like, and takes a long drag from his cigarette.
This is why you run Cyclonic Rift, you fucks. And this card gets around sort of situations like that. And I think that's really, really smart of WotC to do. Good job.
Yeah, glad that they made this because it just gives me one more reason to fuck with Blake.
Aw, thanks, man.
All right.
Love you.
Love you too. All right, Cliffside Rescuer, our last card for the Jeskai deck. It's 1 and a white creature, core soldier, has vigilance. Oh, damn! I didn't even put the power toughness on the notes.
Noob.
I think it's a 2/2. So tap, sacrifice Cliffside Rescuer. Target permanent you control gains protection from each of your opponents until end of turn. So your opponents can't use effects from the creatures that they have to target your creature. They can't use spells to target your creature. Essentially, your creature becomes immune to almost everything that's like target from your opponents. So it really can get through a lot of stuff as long as it's not like a mass board wipe.
Yeah, so like in my mind there was Mother of Runes, and then just recently we got Giver of Runes, and now we have Cliffside Rescuer, which is like a step above that for like 1 additional mana. And so I guess WotC just really likes making cards like this. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting to see how they're creating these cards that interact with the whole table now, instead of just like specific one person, like single-minded mindset. I mean, we've only done 3 of the 4 decks, but I think WotC has done a much better job with this year in terms of cards that go with like the mindset of what EDH is about. And this
I'd agree with that.
Good example of that.
Yeah.
All right, so my impressions for the deck as a whole. First impressions,
Yeah, this one's more in the middle for me. more in the middle.
I think this deck was interesting. It definitely has the most interesting new cards.
Yes.
I want to see how it plays out because I don't see how the win con is supposed to like play out essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, well, Storm, sure, but like you would need to add cards. So like out of the box, what's the win con? Though they may have intentionally built it that way so it could just create longer games in conjunction with the decks that are also out. So if it's the idea of like this deck is going to be playing with these other 3 decks, this is going to help keep the games being longer and more interesting. Okay. But again, I think that this deck doesn't have a clear win con right now, but you could definitely add one in.
Yeah. I agree with everything you just said. Yeah.
I also just realized that the way that we've been structuring this episode is we alternate cards, but you're about to like talk about the face commander for all the cards, all the decks, because now it's your turn to talk about the morph deck.
Yeah, it just worked out that way. It's fine. So the next... Alright, we're on the last deck now, guys. Alright, stick with us. We're doing Morph. Morph's a little bit complicated, but this time it's black, green, blue. Morph is a static ability that... Yes, Sultai. So it's a static ability that functions in any zone from which you could play the card it's on. And the Morph effect works anytime the card is face down. So Morph cost means... You may cast this card as a 2/2 face-down creature with no text, no name, no subtypes, and no mana cost by paying 3 rather than paying its mana cost. Variants such as Megamorph do exist, where you follow the same rules, but would put an additional 1/1 counter on the creature. So not that complicated. So the commander for this deck is Kadena, Slinking Sorcerer. It is 1 black, green, blue legendary creature Naga Wizard 3/3. The first face down creature you cast each turn costs 3 less to cast. Whenever a face down creature you control enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So this is cost reduction and card draw on your commander. Both really, really good. Cheating mana and drawing cards is always good. This is, in my mind, is basically coming off of the popularity of the Animar Morph deck that was kind of realized, I think it's been 1 or 2 years by now. It was super popular. Everyone kind of went crazy over it. And I think this is kind of riding off the coattails of that deck's success while everyone's really hyped about it. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would kind of agree with it. I agree that it's kind of coming off the idea of the Animar deck, but I feel like the Animar deck has, if you like look at a chart, it gained a lot of popularity, but now it's on the decline, where this is giving Morph a brand new commander to like build around, especially because it's opening 2 new colors, because Animar had red and white, I think. Or was it red and green?
It was Teamer. It was red, green, and blue.
Okay, so it's only adding black, but
still,
it's giving you a new way to build Morph. So it's on the decline of like the Morph, and Animar was that kind of like face, but now it's okay. Here's a new commander that you could build around for Morph specifically. So I do agree that it's kind of coming off of that popularity, but it's breathing new life into it as well at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next, we've structured the notes a little differently because drunk novices, of course. So this next card is the commander for this deck that's not specifically going to be a commander you could run out of the deck, but it is Grismold the Dread Sower, 1 black green legendary creature troll shaman, 3/3 with trample. At the beginning of your end step, each player creates a 1/1 green plant creature token. Whenever a creature token dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Grismold the Dreadsower.
Yeah.
Not really too impressed.
Yeah, neither am I. It's kind of like, alright, you kind of make your commander big and then kill with commander damage, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, don't want to spend too much time on this. Morph. So my friends and I are each getting one of the decks, and I'm actually the one who ended up with the Morph deck. Personally, was very disappointed that this was the commander, just because, like, if I were to take it out, like, how would I want to, like, utilize this? Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is I think this is the first year. I'm not 100% sure, just because I've had mixed sources on this, but I think this is the first year where they've said the 4th commander, the one that can't be your commander, will also be in foil.
Maybe, I don't know. I didn't.
Yeah. So don't take our word for it. I can't confirm that either way yet, just because people are giving me mixed signals. But
damn.
Yeah. So, okay. Anyway. Yeah, I don't see how I would want to build this. Don't even have that big of interest. I think the art's okay. Let's just move on.
Yeah, so the next commander is Volrat, the Shapes Stealer. 2
So
black,
this can be
green,
your commander out of the PreCon.
blue. Yes, it can. It is a legendary creature shapeshifter, 7/5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Then you can pay 1 mana. Until your next turn, Volrat the Shape Stealer becomes a copy of target creature with a counter on it, except it's 7/5 and it has this ability. So, I don't know, you kind of build it kind of like Necrotic Ooze combo, I guess, or you can just kind of make it good stuff, copy your own stuff or other people. Personally, like, most decks need to have a win con inside the deck, and you don't really want to be relying on your opponents to have good stuff to copy, but you can. It's kind of however you want to build it. Do whatever you want.
Yeah. I do want to point out that the -1/-1 counter could be on any creature, so it doesn't limit you to just your creatures that Volrath can become. And I also think it's important to note that it doesn't matter if it's even those -1/-1 counters. It could be counters of any kind that are on other creatures.
True.
So that can be very powerful. And the fact that it keeps its base stat of 7/5, which is pretty high for the mana cost of 5, makes it pretty powerful, because you can definitely just try and, like, copy a double striker and
or an
go
infect
in for the
creature.
kill. Yes, I do think that this would be a pretty powerful infect creature, infect commander, if you wanted to build it that way.
There's a lot of options. It's pretty open-ended.
Yes. Next one, Rahami, First of the Fallen. 1 black, green, blue. Legendary creature, vampire. 5/4. If a non-token creature would die, exile that card with a blood counter on it instead. So it also doesn't have to be just your creatures. So as long as an exiled creature with a blood counter on it has flying, Rahami, First of the Fallen, has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is actually pretty similar to a non-legendary creature card back in Lorwyn called Karn Wanderer. I think that's how you say it. And in Mark Rosewater's podcast, he explained, like, why can't just be simplified saying this creature has all keyword abilities of creatures in your graveyard, because it basically leads to a huge rules nightmare. So they have to do this ugly, huge paragraph of spelling out every single keyword ability.
Probably the main keyword abilities, because like I was a little sad that it didn't get the infect keyword ability. I think this could have been like a good small
you would infect
way to like reintroduce infect. But yeah, I do understand like how it could definitely be just like a rules nightmare.
Oh yeah,
in a way. I see this as a Voltron build. Is that kind of what you see, Blake?
I actually didn't really think about, like, this is like the first card where I like didn't even bother thinking about how you would build it, but I guess you could do that. I don't know.
Okay. It's also the first green vampire.
That is true. That is a very good point. When do you ever see green vampires? Never.
Never.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
First one.
Alright, next card.
It is Sudden Substitution. It is 2 blue instant with split second. Exchange control of target non-creature spell and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it. So that's a little complicated to understand. Guy, can you explain it?
Yeah. Well, okay. I had a really good example for you. And now that I'm much more drunk.
It involves Cyclonic
right.
Rift.
Yes. Okay, so it took me like 10 times, 1,000 times to read this card to fully understand it. But basically you can give one of your creatures to an opponent who is casting a spell in exchange, and then you can cast the spell instead. So a good example that I gave to Blake earlier was, let's say we're in a 4-player game. Someone casts Cyclonic Rift. I have a creature on the field. I can cast Sudden Substitution. Because it has split second, no one else can respond to it. So what happens is I will gain control of the Cyclonic Rift spell, and I will give one of my creatures to my opponent. Now I get to use the Cyclonic Rift. That is one case scenario. Because you can also use this to give control of an opponent's creature to someone else. So say, same scenario, someone plays Cyclonic Rift, and I'm playing with Blake. Someone plays Cyclonic Rift. I could give one of Blake's creatures to someone else, so then that Blake can play Cyclonic Rift. And then Blake could definitely go in for the kill, because maybe I'm like, hey Blake, I'm going to use this as like some kind of like politics way, because I want to just give away one of your, chump creatures that doesn't matter, and you could just then go and kill with like Sigarda or someone.
Yeah, it's a little complicated of a card, but it's definitely super neat. You don't see split second printed that often anymore.
No, and definitely one of those politics cards, and definitely one of the, again, cards that WotC had in mind that this was made for multiplayer, which is a huge win.
Yep. All right. So, last but certainly least, we have Cadena's Silencer. It is 1 in a blue creature.
This is my card, Blake. You just talked about Sudden Substitution. I get to talk about this card.
Okay, fine.
Cadena's Silencer. 1 in a blue. Creature Naga Wizard. 2 and a 1. When Cadena's Silencer is turned face up, counter all abilities your opponents control. But it has Megamorph. So that means that you can cast it face down for 3 colorless. And since Cadena herself has the ability that, like, she says the first card that you play face down costs 3 less, you could essentially play this for free on your turn. And then you can megamorph for 1 in a blue to then counter at the right time all abilities that your opponents control. And it's a lot harder to interact with morph, just the way that the stack works. So this is pretty much a one-time one-time counter everything guaranteed.
Meh.
Okay, well, you say that again, but I think, yes, in the broad sense of EDH, this card is meh. But in the sense that this card is made for this deck, I think that this is a pretty good card.
Agreed.
Yes. Alright, so thoughts on the deck overall? This deck seems like it would be a lot of fun to play with and to play against, since there is a huge element of surprise. It reminds me a lot of like Yu-Gi-Oh! In the sense of like trap cards, where
you activated my trap card.
Pretty much. I mean, you know, it gives the element of surprise that, ooh, I don't know what that is that my opponent has face down. And it can definitely lead to some interesting gameplays. This is the deck that, again, as I mentioned, I'm going to be playing with from my friends. So I can give some more in-depth thoughts about what I personally think of this deck later. And then I can also kind of talk to some of the other decks as we see how they play out. But I think this is probably the most fun deck of the decks. I also don't think that it has a clear win con, similar to how the Jeskai and the Populate deck is the only one that I think has a clear win con. The Madness deck could have a win con. It has a good engine, but yeah, Jeskai and Morph don't have that, like, what's the win con kind of sense. But this just gets into so we mentioned earlier in the episode the design philosophy and how, you know, the objectives of these new decks were to introduce Commander, support existing decks, and inspire new decks. So for introducing Commander, personally, good start for anyone who wants to start playing Commander. It's not too overwhelming to start build a deck. These decks kind of like give you a good segue in. I know that especially when Blake bought me the Dragon 2 years ago, it took a lot of the pressure off of me. And I think that these decks also do a really good job of being built around a certain idea that isn't necessarily too complicated and will scare away new players, but also give enough to satisfy existing players.
Yeah, that's how it... Yeah, I agree. Where it's like, that was exactly like how I got you into Commander, is I gave you a PreCon, and I was like, hey, try this out. And the PreCon was built well enough where it had a theme, so like anyone could kind of like latch onto that idea and be like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and they're not completely lost as to like, what the fuck am I doing with this card and this card? This doesn't make any sense. Where it kind of guides you in a narrow channel, which you need when you're a new player. So, yep, 2 thumbs up.
All right. Next is support existing decks. So the new cards that help deal with problematic cards that we've kind of talked about, they give tools to colors that are kind of lacking in the Commander. So you have like Mandate Peace, Aeon Engine, Cliffside Rescuer. These are cards that definitely can help interact with the more multiplayer sense that these cards are meant for multiplayer. They're not something that you would want to play in a dual commander sense, but you know, they deal with problematic cards before, and they can now, you know, I don't know. It's just nice to see more answers, because it then, you know, leads to less cards being like ban worthy almost, because like, you know, everyone wants to ban Cyclonic Rift, but the more answers you give to Cyclonic Rift, not that Cyclonic Rift will necessarily become less powerful, but it'll lead to these pre-existing cards that can like help deal with it so it doesn't become too problematic.
Yeah, I'd say I'd give this like 1 thumbs up. Like there are a couple cards here and there that like support archetypes that already exist or decks that already exist.
Yeah, it's the cards that weren't specifically designed for the flashback or the morph mechanic in mind. It was just the new cards in general that were more made for the multiplayer sense of that, you know, thumbs up from us.
Yeah.
All right. And the last thing was inspire new decks. So each deck has a new legendary creature that is in the primary colors of the deck, but doesn't relate to the deck's theme. We saw this with the vampire in the morph deck. We saw this with the predator captain in the madness deck. These cards, while can be your commander right out of the box, aren't necessarily the commanders that you might want to run because they don't synergize well. But they can be taken out and then put into a new deck that, you know, maybe you build from the scratch for yourself. I enjoy this idea because I would have liked this to have stayed primarily in the other new legendaries, however, so in the ones that can't be your commander, since I would like to see more. I would have liked to have seen each of the new commanders that could be your commander out of the box be able to synergize with your deck, because I feel like that's what the product's meant to be. Is maybe you have the one face commander and that's the commander you want to run, but then you also have like other options that just help, you know, with the gameplay in general, or kind of like spice things up. And then you have one commander that maybe you can take out and build a whole new deck around. So for me, this gets like a sideways thumb. Like, it works because for all the decks in here, 2 out of the 3 of them, sure, they could be your commander and run pretty well with the deck, but I think it would have been even better if all 3 of the new commanders could have been all 3 of the new commanders that could be your commander out of the box worked and synergized with your deck, maybe in different ways, but worked and synergized with your deck so that you didn't have to then spend more money to then build a whole new deck around them.
Not sure I followed that line of thinking, but the one thing I have to say about this is, so these precons, they have the commander, and then they have like 3 or 4 subsequent commanders in the 99, which can then be taken out and make their own commander decks, right? So if you make those subsequent commanders all fit with the main commander, then players will complain, well, none of these new commanders are unique enough. And then if you make all these subsequent commanders all different, then players will complain, well, then none of this synergizes with the main commander in the precon. So it's a lose-lose situation. It's like an inherent problem that you can never really solve. So WotC kind of just makes the most of it and has a balance between these subsequent commanders supporting and some not directly supporting. So in my mind, they get a thumbs up.
For me, it's a sideways thumb, but I do see what you're saying and how it's kind of like a lose-lose either way you go. But the one thing that I also want to mention, and I know, Blake, that you had your own thoughts about this, but for me, one of the biggest missed opportunities was not bringing back the Eminence ability, which was a keyword ability that allows you to activate an effect while you have your commander in the command zone or while on the battlefield. I know that it is a strong ability, but without these commanders on the field, I think that these decks are going to be kind of hard to run without them on the field. So if you're having trouble getting to the point of like getting them out, your deck's not going to be able to run that well. And I know that I've talked shit about like Eminence before because it's like a pseudo enchantment emblem that you can't interact with, but I think I can't really think of like what I would do at the moment to maybe power down Eminence maybe make it like a only on your turn kind of thing. But I don't think that these decks run well enough without their commanders on the battlefield where they can use the keyword abilities to the best that they can be.
Well, I'm kind of gonna disagree with you on this point, which is fine. It's like we just had Eminence recently, so if in my view, if WotC had made this set have Eminence, it's like, what are you running out of ideas already? Like, we just had this. Come on, like, think of something original. And like the argument you kind of made, which is like, well, then the deck does nothing without the commander. You kind of make that argument with almost any EDH deck, so I'm not really convinced by that much. Like, I mean, these precons are like not like super powerful in the first place. They're not meant to. So it's like, you know, it's fine if a commander dies and you have to spend a turn or two to get the mana to recast it for the commander decks. I think that's fine. I'm fine that there wasn't Eminence, and I'm fine the way these decks were designed.
Okay, I mean, yes, I do see your points, but then I don't know then if like lowering the mana cost on some of these commanders would have helped, because I think, well,
I mean, lowering the mana cost of commanders always helps, but
yeah, because then if you do happen to get rid of one of the commanders, you know, you're adding 2 more onto the attacks. And Anya is the only one that costs 3 and could easily be getting out on like turn 2 in an optimal build.
Well, kind of off this line of thinking, what do you think is the best new commander from this set?
Oh, I mean, Crick, son of Yawgmoth, 100%, no doubt 100%? In my mind.
Oh god.
Yes.
Maybe this is gonna be like a core set like 2020, where it's like I'm kind of split between Anya and Crick. I'm not going to commit to either one this time. I'm not going to be a fool like last time, but it's either one of those two. Yeah.
Well, I think you definitely gave a very convincing argument for why Anya could be, you know, a very powerful commander, the way that you explained that combo. Mm-hmm. But I think Crick, just the fact that like if you're able to get him out so early, and you could just because of the Phyrexian mana, I just feel like he could almost be like turn 2, turn 3 wins pretty consistently.
But we both agree that like those are the top 2, right?
Yes. The Madness deck. Sorry. So all right. Before we get into best new deck necessarily, what's the best new single card that will go in the 99?
I basically would say Dockside Extortionist, that goblin that makes treasure based on the number of artifacts and enchantments you have. It's just it's low CMC and it can scale with the game, and it just has the potential, especially in the format of EDH, to just be explosive.
I think it's I agree that, well, okay. At first, I would have said yes. For 100% sure, Dockside Extortionist. But I think, to me, it's more like there are maybe 3 cards that I would put as like the best new cards. So Dockside Extortionist being one of them. I think the Leadership Vacuum probably makes it on that list too. And then I would also say that Sudden Substitution probably makes it on the list for me. So these 3 cards are like top 99.
That, and we're specifically choosing non-legendary creatures, just so all you listeners know.
Yes, because otherwise, Crick, if he could be put into the 99, and he can be,
he probably would. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise he would also be probably the best 99 card as well, or he would make my list for top 3 contenders.
Yeah, we're pretty much in agreement.
Best new deck out of the box.
Yeah, I think it's the Anya deck, just because, you know, in casual metas, combat matters more, and the Anya deck seems pretty good with what it's doing, and that's beating face with creatures, and seems good.
Yes, I agree that out of the box, the Anya deck, the populate deck, best one, no doubt. Now, Blake, which one, so if you had like the 4 face commanders, do you think could be most powerful on its most optimal build?
So you're asking, like, of the 4 main commanders, if you optimized each of them, which one would be the best?
Yes.
Oh.
Or, well, I guess that kind of goes back to our best new commander, because you said Anya. Because that's what I would say, is like Anya is probably the best one if
Yeah.
you were to optimize it, especially with your Doomsday contraption, like synergize. Probably Anya.
Yes. No doubt
The-
Anya. Not probably Anya. Without a doubt.
Okay.
No,
Okay,
there
so
is
out
no
of the
doubt
box-
here.
All right, so out of the box, populate the Naya deck. For most optimized build, Anya with the Rakdos. Okay, well,
Okay, we did it.
that was quite a lot. It is a very long episode. We're really happy that you guys stuck with us. Please make sure that you follow us on Twitter. We have a YouTube channel. We are also on iTunes and Spotify. You can reach out to us through our email, wizardstaff101@gmail.com. Blake, any final thoughts you want to give on Commander 2019? Would you say that you're satisfied with Commander 2019?
I'm satisfied. I think a lot of the player community is satisfied. Let us know what you think of what we've said, especially after you've gotten the cards. Let us know if we're just completely wrong about everything, because we probably are. So,
I guess
yeah.
one question I also didn't ask you, Blake, is are there any cards, any new cards that you are thinking of buying?
That's a good question. I'm actually not planning to buy any of these cards, but that doesn't stop me from still thinking that this is a well-made product.
Then that's very fair. So thank you guys for listening. We hope you have a great night, and we'll talk to you again later. Peace.
Peace.